All right, so if everybody's ready, I'll call the meeting to order. The committee clerk, she is, will take a silent roll call. We do not have a quorum yet, so we will skip the motion to approve the minutes for now. And we'll go ahead and move on to our first presenter. And our first presentation is from Mr. Brad Smith, president of this wonderful university. President Smith, if you come up, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, distinguished committees. Delighted to have you all on Marshall's campus. As I shared last evening, as we greeted some of you at the Keith Albee, our whole town is buzzing and our campus community is buzzing. So thank you for honoring us by being here today. And thank you for the invitation to speak to you and share Marshall for All, Marshall Forever. This is our strategic roadmap to future prosperity. And when we talk about prosperity, we talk about prosperity for our students, our faculty and staff, our state, and our institution. And the work that I'm going to walk you through will take about 20 minutes or so, and then I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. If I get into a longer version of the story, just kind of move me along, and I'll make sure I keep us on track. But it's important to say that this work actually is the result of a significant number of people. It started 18 months ago when we reached out to 18 sitting and former presidents of universities who have actually reached the highest levels of higher education, which means their universities are graduating more students on time, they're growing their enrollment, and they're actually building their endowments, and they're creating success in their communities. And we wanted to go learn from them, how did you do that with all the secular headwinds that are happening out here in higher ed? We then brought it in-house. We had 38 listening sessions with more than 1,000 people in the campus and the community, generated 1,200 ideas. And then we took that and we worked with McKinsey Consulting and the Boston Consulting Group and formed a vision and strategy committee on campus, and we did 60 different working sessions over the summer and fall. The end result is what I'm going to walk you through today. And the way we want to walk through this is to break it into 3 sections. I hope at the end of this 20 minutes, you have a better understanding of our storied history and tradition at Marshall. You acknowledge and can see the headwinds we're navigating in higher education and at Marshall University. But then you have confidence that we are committed to a strategic roadmap that's going to continue to build upon our foundation and strengthen our future. And so with that, let me start with our storied history. Marshall University is privileged to be one of our state's flagship universities. Since 1837, we have driven 186 years of continuous growth and advancement. We have produced 120,000 alumni, many of whom have reached the top of their chosen profession. Along the way, our academic standing has continued to grow. We started as an academy in 1837. We became a college in 1858. We became a university in 1961. And then in 2018, Carnegie Mellon designated us as an R2 institution, which is a university with high research activity. That puts us in the company of only 7% of the nation's colleges and universities in the country. Along the way, our athletics program has remained the heartbeat of our campus and our community. And we've also had our share of losses. We certainly lived through the tragedy of a plane crash, but we've risen from those ashes to go on to win glorious bowl games, national championships, and it is just something that our community gets excited about all the time. Throughout all of this, what gets me most excited is we haven't forgotten who we are. The soul has remained intact. We are a student-focused, community-oriented school that continues to build on its traditions of the past while reimagining and reinventing itself for the future. Today, Marshall serves 11,000 students, 77% of whom come from the state of West Virginia. And last weekend, we had commencement. 54% of those students were the first in their family to graduate college. We are a gateway institution. We accept you for who you are and help you become whoever you want to be. Those students are served by 1,770 faculty and staff, and we deliver programs and services to them through 4 physical locations, which include our 2 airports, where we have a pilot program and an aviation maintenance and technician program. We also have a wonderful medical school that produces clinicians that practice in the rural communities throughout the state in Appalachia. We have that vibrant athletic program. We have an exciting alumni and foundation that keeps our 120,000 connected to the community and to the state. We have a Marshall University Research Corporation That is our entity that advances our research, our grants, and our contracts that are applied research to help strengthen our local economy. It also is the house for the Robert C. Byrd Institute that we are now renaming the Marshall Advanced Manufacturing Center, where we teach apprenticeships for advanced welders, for machinists, for people who want to come and be a part of the community, but may not want a 2-year or a 4-year degree, but they want to learn the skills they need to participate in the economy. Last but not least, many of our faculty at the School of Medicine are practicing clinicians, and they do provide healthcare services in the southern part of the state and throughout Appalachia. A very exciting, vibrant ecosystem that when you put it together, plays an important role. I describe this role as a prosperity platform. If you look up the definition of platform in Wikipedia, it is a surface, it's elevated relative to the surrounding region that others can stand upon and reach higher heights. When you have 77% of your students coming from in-state and 54% first in their family to go to college, we are that platform that accelerates individual success, innovative ideas, and economic impact. And just briefly talk about the individual success. I'm going to gush for a minute. I'm proud. This institution has alumni that are admirals and generals, Fortune 500 CEOs, elected officials. We have Emmy, Tony, Pulitzer Prize Award winners. We have doctors, nurses, educators, scientists. We have pro athletes, pro coaches, Heisman Trophy finalists, and Hall of Fame inductees. Said another way, if you can dream big and imagine who you want to be, Marshall can help you become that version of yourself. Innovative ideas, we have research, creativity, and scholarship. As an R2 institution, we build capability not only in our individual students, but in our communities so that we collectively can participate in the 21st century and continue to be that place you call upon to do the things that the nation needs. And that drives economic impact. Today, for every dollar you invest in Marshall, we produce a 14x return. The market's a little choppy right now. I wouldn't mind picking a stock that if I put $1 in today, I get 14x coming back. Education in Marshall is one of those places. This is the role of impact. As exciting as that is, that gives us a tremendous foundation. I know you've heard me talk about this over the last year. You've heard Gordon come out and talk about this recently with WVU. You're hearing Rutgers, Penn State, and others talk about this. There is a huge transition happening in higher education right now. It's the result of major trends that are happening around the world. We now live in a global economy, connected in the cloud, powered by big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and yes, generative AI, also known as ChatGPT. And it is causing massive reinvention and disruption. In fact, 52% of the companies in private industry that were on the Fortune 500 list in the year 2000 are no longer on the Fortune 500 list in 2023 because they no longer exist. 500 of the biggest companies in the world, now 54% no longer exist in 23 years. And higher ed is not immune. We are going through this significant reimagination. I want to just briefly touch on what the major things are happening in higher ed that Marshall's navigating, and then what is our game plan to actually come out even stronger. The first is a significant shift in student preferences and needs. You've heard on the left-hand side of this chart about the enrollment cliff. That is the opposite of the baby boom. After World War II, we came home, we built families. The generation that followed chose to have fewer children. As a result, starting in 2025, there will be 15% fewer high school seniors graduating who will be eligible to go to college at the national level. In West Virginia, it's 21% fewer because we're an older population in West Virginia. So 21% fewer high school graduates coming out starting in 2025. That's issue one. Issue two is, of those who are graduating, there's less inclination to go to college. In fact, right now, 12% of seniors in high school are fewer, 12% fewer want to go to college than they wanted to 10 years ago. And in West Virginia, again, that number is dropping even faster. 18% fewer high school seniors want to go to college. If you look back 10 years ago, 56% of our high school seniors chose college. We're now down to 46%. When you ask the parents and the students, why are you not thinking about higher education? Three things come to mind. Affordability. I can't afford it. Flexibility. I work full-time at Walmart and Chick-fil-A, and the classes are Tuesday and Thursday at 11, and I can't get off my shift. I need to be able to work around my work. I have a child at home. The third, is it even going to be worth me getting the job? Will it help me get the job I want? So affordability, flexibility, and achievement are the three things, and keep those in mind. Second major trend, there is a real question right now about the return on investment in higher ed. If you look at the left-hand side, these statistics are real. The weighted average cost of tuition has gone up 10% since 2007. Student loan debt's gone up 45%. That is faster than healthcare or anything else that we're dealing with. If you look in the middle, Marshall is actually strategically positioned. We are incredibly affordable. If you compare our tuition on an annual basis of roughly $8,000 to our in-state peers and to the 66 schools in the Southeast region called the SREB, we are significantly more affordable than those. And what gets me excited, if you look at the far right, if you take the cost to come to school and then what your starting average salary is when you graduate, you'll see we have a very favorable ROI. So you would say, wow, Marshall's really in the catbird seat. And we are, with one exception. 27% of our students come from families whose income is below the poverty line. Only 10% of our students come from families who make more than $110,000 a year. We are a gateway institution that want to help those that may not have the financial means go to college and achieve their dreams. So 63% of Marshall students are graduating with an average student loan debt of almost $26,000, even though we're as affordable as we are. We've got to fix that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. By the way, it's not just our university, it's not just our universities in the state. On the left-hand side, last year there was a speaker in Chicago that spoke to all the university presidents. Arthur Levine, he wrote a book called The Great Upheaval. He said higher ed is getting massively reinvented, just as it did back in the 1890s when we had to transition it to move from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy. We're now moving into this new world with three things on the left-hand side. Digital transformation, including ChatGPT, is going to reimagine education. The second is the demands of the knowledge economy require us to teach different skills than we were teaching 15, 20 years ago. And the third is there now are alternatives. I asked the president of Arizona State University, which university do you most admire? And he said, YouTube. I said, what? He said, it's the largest learning platform in the world. Think about where everyone goes. Those are the alternatives now that students turn to. Khan Academy, Coursera. I mean, all of us who have kids or grandkids know that they go find those things. We have to think about those as alternatives that we can build into our curriculum. In the middle, as a result, higher education universities are now starting to focus on in-demand curriculums, making sure what they're teaching is what society needs and what economies need. The second is they're starting to teach more flexible classes online, in the classroom. You get to choose. You have any option. It's not prescribed for you. And the third is, this is the thing I get most excited about. I think U.S. News and World Report stack-ranking universities did a lot of unintended harm. And now universities are pulling out and saying, we don't care about that listing anymore because that's really not what education's about. And so now you see universities focusing on practicality and not prestige. If you look to the far right, the fastest growing segments in higher ed right now are online and something called micro-credentials or certificates. Taking a major and a minor and breaking it down into 6-week courses where you can learn a skill and then be able to get a job raise as a result of that. And I'll give you an example. When I graduated from Marshall in 1986, I was taught to code in BASIC, COBOL, and Fortran. The only thing that still uses that is the IRS. I will say today, since I moved out and went into higher tech, it became C, C++, C#, Java, and now it's Python. So if I was in technology, I wouldn't have to drop out and come back full time to get that degree. I could actually go online, figure out how to code in Python, go and tell my supervisor and get the job. So that's the kind of stuff we have to continue to think about. Last point very quickly, and then I'm going to touch on what we're doing and take questions. Marshall University acknowledged this reality 18 months ago. Enrollment cliff, we hit our enrollment cliff in 2010. In 2010, Marshall peaked with 14,000 students. In 2023, we now have 11,000. Now I'm going to juxtapose that against another commuter college in a rural state that was suffering from declining population, New Hampshire. There's a school, Southern New Hampshire University. In 2010, we had 14,000 students. They had 13,000. 2023, we have 11,000. They have 178,000. Did they shut down their campus? No. Do they have low-end education that's not very good? Their graduation rates and all that compare with our state schools here in the state. But they figured out how to serve students online as well as classrooms. They went after military veterans, working adults, people who had to work around their schedule, and they figured out how to serve all of those. And that's the lessons that we have to embrace. By the way, it's coming to West Virginia. This middle column, over the last 3 years, 15% of all the degrees that have been earned in the state of West Virginia by students in West Virginia were done completely online. That's 3,400 degrees. So it's already here. The challenge, WVU only gave 10% of those degrees. Marshall gave 6. The bulk of those degrees were bestowed upon our students by out-of-state institutions being served by other places. So we are all stepping back and saying we have a chance to think about this differently. By the way, financial reality, you saw this. I shared this with the Senate Finance Committee back in February. McKinsey did work that said if you don't turn this around, you're on a path for a $34 million deficit by 2026. We're at $28 million now. You've heard my peer institutions, Gordon and others, talk about where they are as well. We are operating in a deficit, but as I've shared with our campus community, if we were playing golf, the ball is in the sand trap, but there's a club in the bag for that called a sand wedge, and there's a swing, and if you follow through, you can get it up on the green, and you can actually get this thing into the hole, and that's what we're doing. So we have a strategy, and this is our strategic roadmap. I'm going to clip through it quickly and then just talk about Marshall for All, Marshall Forever, and then we'll wrap up from there. It's got 3 phases. First, we have to stabilize our financial situation. The second, we want to adopt the best practices of those universities that are growing despite the enrollment cliff and everything else we talked about. And the third is we want to become distinctive so people start to write case studies about us. What did Marshall University do? How did they figure that out? How did they work so closely with WVU and Mount West and others to make this happen? We want to become the case study that others study. That's our 3-phased approach. Last spring, we declared our financial principles. We're very clear. Every decision we make, we're going to grow students, not fees. We're going to invest in our faculty and staff, make sure we're paying a fair market wage. We want to take care of the house, and thank you so much for deferred maintenance. It's going to be a game changer for us to be able to fix all that deferred maintenance. It's going to make it a better learning environment for our students. And last, we want to use our strategic resources to make sure we can withstand a recession or another pandemic. What you see to the right-hand side is too much detail. What it basically says, $27.7 million deficit. We just presented a 3-year plan to our Board of Governors that we will be back in the green in 2027. And that is including fixing deferred maintenance, raising some salaries for faculty and staff that are below market, doing all the things we need to do. We have a clear plan, we have a lot of conviction, and we believe we can make this happen. To do that, we're aligning our finances to the programs. In other words, you grow your program, it's called an incentivized budget model, you get more money. If your program's shrinking, we'll have less money for that program. So it's basically a pro forma program that our deans and our department chairs are excited about. And the second is we're adopting the financial planning principles that we would use in private industry, which is let's do a 5-year forecast and track how we're doing. And if we're on track, let's not wait to get surprised. Let's make course adjustments along the way. So those are the foundational principles we put in place, and we needed to because we did have our credit rating reduced this year. That's the bad news. The good news is Marshall's still one of the top 2 highest credit rated higher education institutions in the state. So we're not in trouble, but we don't like the direction it's going, and we got to turn it around. Hanging in there so far? All right, so here's the game plan. This, by the way, there are lots of ways to do strategy. If you've talked to McKinsey or Bain or Boston Consulting, or if I asked each of you to define a strategy, we'd probably get all the different definitions. There is no wrong answer. It's basically choosing an angle into the wind and start sailing, and then leave yourself enough flexibility that if the wind stops blowing, you actually tack 45 degrees and you just keep going in the same direction. This is known as an alignment triangle. It was used by NASA. If you all remember 1962, there's a famous story where President Kennedy was visiting NASA. He saw a gentleman sweeping the floor. He walked over and said, "Sir, I'm Jack Kennedy. What do you do?" And he said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." And it's because they were able to say, from vision down to metrics, here's what we're solving for. These are the goals. These are our strategies. And here's how your work fits in. And everyone in the campus should be able to see how what they're doing is helping advance the mission of the university. So this is our game plan. What I'm going to walk you through is our vision remains unchanged. It is to inspire learning and creativity that ignites your mind, it nurtures your spirit, fulfills the promise of a better future. This has been around for almost 25 years. It's enduring. We're excited about it. It speaks to the head, the heart, and the hands. Our values are our creed. This was also written almost 25 years ago by the campus community. It describes the aspirations that we have for ourselves, and nothing here is out of date. We're excited about this as well. It's a vibrant campus community. But 1 year ago, we did say we want to start dreaming bigger. In 2037, Marshall will turn 200 years old. That was 15 years ago when we started this project. It's 14 years now. So we said, what do we want to look like at our 200th anniversary? We're still going to be a prosperity platform, but we want 100% of our students who graduate to get the job or career of their choice, and we want 0 of them to have student loan debt. I'll talk about that in a minute. The second, we want to continue to be a research institution, but we want to grow our research grants and contracts from $63 million today to $150 million then, and increase the number of startups coming off of our campus by 3x. An economic impact, instead of $14 for every dollar that you invest, we want a 30x return. That'll be $2.5 billion to the community and to the state. All of those, by the way, are based upon current trends. So these are actually conservative. We think we could be even more aggressive, but we want to prove that we can get to this point. To do that, we've broken that down into what we call bite-sized chunks. We broke it into 3-year goals. And the neat thing about this is this aligns to the performance-based funding formula that you all approved, that the Higher Education Policy Commission helped architect with all the presidents. We have student success metrics, we have employee success metrics, we have state, how many of our graduates will stay here and get a job, and we also have financial metrics for the institution. So suffice it to say, in every cabinet meeting, we're going through these numbers. This is our strategy on one page. I know it's visually, what is it telling me? It says in the bullseye, what we're going to deliver for every student is an affordable education that's flexible enough to work around your work schedule or if you have a child at home. And we're going to measure success through your eyes. Did you achieve what you wanted to get out of life? To make that happen, at the top, we're not just going to serve high school students because we know there are fewer of them. We're expanding to military veterans, adult workers, metro students. We expanded our prices to 59 counties in Kentucky and Ohio, and we're seeing that grow like a weed. Welcome to Marshall. Welcome to West Virginia. At the bottom part of this pie chart, we know we work in an ecosystem. We partner with our community and technical colleges. We partner with WVU and the other 4-year schools. We partner with you and with employers. And we're shifting the whole school to teach an in-demand curriculum with on-demand classrooms that can be high flex in the classroom or online. And we're going to choose where we're distinctive. You're going to see at lunch. What does that mean? WVU Medicine is focused on neuro, cancer, heart, and children. We sat down with Gordon and Albert Wright and said, great, those are huge issues that are going to help our state solve world problems. We will then focus on addiction, gerontology, obesity, and rural health. Your physicians can help us with this. Our physicians will help you with that. And together we'll have 8 things that the world is looking for answers. That is how we become distinctive and not duplicative. And we're working collaboratively to do that. We have laid out 5 priorities to make it all happen. Serving more students than just high school, ensuring no debt, growing support programs so they graduate on time, making sure our classrooms are taught on demand or in the classroom, and helping students with certificates. So if they go out to Silicon Valley and they learn how to write COBOL, and now they have to know Python, they can take an online certificate and be able to continue their job. And we got 1 page for each. This is the last point I'll make. I'm actually doing a call tomorrow with Metro News again, because the question is, no student loan debt, is this a forgiveness program? No, it's not a handout, it's a helping hand. We studied Berea College, who has a tuition-free program with work study. We studied Ohio State, the Scarlet and Gray Advantage. And what we found out is if the students will commit to a FAFSA every year, filling out the FAFSA program, their families, to the extent they can, cover their portion of estimated family contribution, and many times they can't. The calculation says this and they can't do that, but as much as you can. If the students will agree to take a financial literacy course, so they know how to manage their finances when they graduate, and a work-study program, we're going to connect them with jobs in the state or paid internships. Then we'll go to work on everything else. We'll help them with the federal dollars, we'll help them with the state dollars, and we're going to do private fundraising. To do this, we'll need $300 million over the next 10 years. And no student will graduate from Marshall again with student loan debt. Now, $300 million sounds like a lot. We just raised $176 million in 4.5 years. My math from Wayne County told me that 176 and 4, I could get to 310. And we're excited, and we're already going to have the first 100 students in the fall. And no sooner did we announce it, a private donor came up and paid for the entire 100 students for the next 4 years. $2 million check. We now have foundations that I've had the chance to work with that we all know from the West Coast and elsewhere calling and saying, these are the kinds of things we're willing to support. Because they're not handouts. These are help the student learn how to manage their finances, understand the value of work, and help them get out on time, and we'll make sure they come out without a boat anchor around their ankle. So that's where we are. It's all one plan on a page. So now, hopefully, every faculty member, staff, community member, student, from our vision down to our metrics, will say, I'm helping put a man or woman on the moon. Marshall for all, Marshall forever. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, President Smith. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, Co-Chair has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, President Smith. I think very good vision. What is the cost differential to offering an online? So what do you have right now?
A cost differential of offering an online program to someone in person. Actually, a lot of the overhead cost is already factored in. And you still have the teacher, you still have facilities, you have IT. One of the things we did not realize is we were harming online students because we had a lower price, but as a result, they couldn't come to, if they were in the state, they couldn't come to athletic events, they could not use the rec center, they couldn't come on campus. And so we actually realized that because we were trying to keep costs lower, we were robbing them of the student experience. So what we are doing now is basically the cost is pretty much the same, and we are now leveling that price out in the fall. So online and in-state will be the same. And they'll get access to all the amenities.
Thank you. Any further questions for President Smith? Delegate Tully.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, President Smith. You are quite correct about the online education catering to working students. I would hear that frequently from nurses that chose to go back for an additional advanced degree. Those online universities seem to cater toward the working schedule, and that is one of the things I think is why they have proliferated the way they have. So I think that's actually an excellent point and probably a wonderful thing to pursue for our students here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Delegate. Are there any other questions? Delegate Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. President Smith, you just said that you're going to maintain the cost for the online and the in-state
Yes.
students, and you want them to have the same experience. Do those online students actually have an option to go ahead and buy into be able to come to the facilities, or is that taken away and it's just included in the cost?
So let me make sure I understand the question. Is it if someone lives in California, they're taking an online
Yes.
course?
Yes.
What we are working on right now is we've been studying the best practices of those who have a bigger mix of online students, and they do things to build student engagement and experience, even if they're not near the physical location. They give them access to things they wouldn't do, so we're building those in as value add. So the answer to your question is we may have them come to campus once or twice a year as a part of an event where they can participate, but we're also looking for ways to add more value into their student experience. So even if they can't come to the rec center, we're not just taking money and making margin. We're actually investing it into their experience so they feel like they're actually getting something for it. And I'll give you a wonderful example. I mentioned Southern New Hampshire University. They have wraparound services to help students matriculate and get out on time. They average one advisor for roughly every 200 students, and that compares to 1 to every 800 to many larger institutions like us. So we've got to think differently about how we get more support and advising to those students, which would bring more cost, but that would be built into that tuition.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for the question. Yes.
Mr. President, I'm curious, as you go online in terms of competition with students, so you're going, you all of a sudden have, you have every student in the country that you potentially could have as a student, right? How many other universities are you competing with nationwide? Do you have any idea what the percentage is of universities that are doing the same thing?
Yeah, a lot of the universities that you'll see listed at the top of US News and World Report have really resisted going online. And if you read Clay Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, disruption often happens from what they would consider the low end. It's when others will go in and say, no, look, there's a shift in student preference here. They want to have online or classroom flexibility. The answer to your question, though, is many are now moving online because this is the same way as shopping. Some people want to be able to shop in the store. Some people want to be able to get it delivered to their home or curbside pickup, and it needs to be flexible enough for the student to choose. So I do think there are going to be a lot out there, which is why we have to be clear about how we will be distinctive. And how we're going to be distinctive is a commitment that says we'll help you get to the career of your choice, and we'll help you do so without student loan debt. That's going to be very hard for larger institutions who have 60,000 students to try to be able to match, but we're going to be able to do that. So we're going to have to choose how we're going to be distinctive.
Thank you, Senator. Are there further questions? Delegate Lewis.
President Smith, thank you for your presentation. Has the university looked at what kind of broadband is available to especially students in our region, and to see if we need to do something as a state and work with companies to expand broadband so that people who want to become students can actually take their online courses where they are?
Yes. We do need to solve that problem for the state. And I have confidence with Secretary Carmichael on the work that's going on here in the state, the collaborations we have with private industry, with Starlink and what's coming there, Kuipers from Amazon, others are trying to go after this. We're going to have to not assume, we're going to have to do the hard work to get there, but it's going to be there because every community is going to need this, or you won't have remote workers. You won't have entrepreneurism coming into your state. You're not going to have education. I mean, this is basically the way of the future. So we do need that work to be done, and we're working very collaboratively with Secretary Carmichael and others to make sure that's in place. But we don't want to wait and not start because it could take a few years to get done, and we can find ways to solve that problem today.
Hear from Monongalia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. President, the $300 million figure that you talked about, is the purpose of that to provide interest off of that money to make those annual tuition payments?
It is. So we're going to need to find a pathway to roughly $10 million a year to be able to make this happen. And that, by the way, is because we don't want to lose the focus of serving the overlooked and underserved, or students who may be coming from families with less means. If for whatever reason the economy shifted and we didn't have those students, but we said we want to continue to do that, and so we're going to keep the mix we have and then find a way to help them get through college. And it's about $10 million a year. I am undaunted by that. I can't tell you the number of people that we've had this conversation with at large foundations that we know their names, that get excited about an incredibly talented group of people. And this is a story I tell, you've heard me say this before. Our state has always answered the call. We come from the families that mine coal, that forge steel, that build roads, that carry trucks, that fought the wars. When you needed a man on the moon, we produced Homer Hickam and the boys in October Sky. When you needed them safely back to Earth, we produced Katherine Johnson and the Hidden Figures. These are the same people that want to do this next thing, and you need to help us. And they're excited about doing it. They're fired up. So I'm an optimist. I'm going to fight every day to try to make this a reality. All right.
Delegate Statler, did you have a question?
Yes. Mr. Smith, excuse me, my question is going to be an unfair question to you, but that's just the way it is.
Okay.
If we look at West Virginia and we're listening to what you're saying, we have this cliff driving steeply off of enrollment that's going to be available to the colleges and universities across the state. But yet, are we over populated colleges and universities across this state? Are we at some time going to have to take a look at what model we're going to produce out there and how that model is going to be? Because clearly some of these colleges and universities can only exist with the money that we're pouring into them now. My question to you is this something that we will need to be looking at the same as you're looking at your university in the near future?
I think it's a prudent thing for every state to look at. And I will say this, right now, our focus amongst all of us is how are we distinctive and not duplicative? How do we work together? And I've described an orchestra. Someone plays the drums, someone plays the trumpet. I gave you the example of West Virginia University Medicine and Marshall Health and how we're trying to do that. If we can do that with the institutions we have, then the answer is we got the right number. If we end up with, we got 5 people doing the same thing, then the real question is that the most viable model going forward? But I think we have to do the work to figure that out. I would like to see this population with remote workers, with the companies moving in here, with the startups starting to happen, we grow population, and maybe we grow into the education system that we have. But right now, I think it's a real challenge because we do have fiscal challenges for our colleges and universities.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did I dodge that question?
That's right. I'm looking at the chancellor back here.
I literally leaned over and was like, that was a great answer.
At least he gave you a heads up.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate it.
Are there any further questions for President Smith? Okay, thank you so much,
Thank
sir,
you.
for your time. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you all so much.
I think you guys know where to find him if one pops up in your head.
Right.
Before we go on to the next presenter, I think we do have a quorum now. Let's place some check marks next to faces as they came in. So we'll go ahead and go back to the approval of the minutes, and I'll recognize the co-chair for a motion.
Yes, Madam Chair, I move the minutes from the meeting held April 18th, 23 be approved.
The question is on the motion that the minutes of the meeting held on April 18th, 2023 be approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. I declare the motion adopted. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a presentation on early literacy professional development from Ms. Toni Backstrom. She's with Strategic State Solutions at Lexia Learning. You're the director, is it, right? Yes. Okay, thank you for being here. So really quickly had to swear in, if you don't mind. Okay. Do you swear that the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you very much. You may begin.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, thank you, members. Thank you for inviting us to be here today. Mr. President, he may have left, but thank you for the great, there he is. Thank you for the great location for this meeting. It's an honor to be here with my colleagues from Lexia today to talk about early literacy at a point where all of you made some great changes and advancements for early literacy here in West Virginia. Not only for the students and for their futures, but also for investing in your teachers as well and those professionals along the way. I wanted to be here today to help you look at that path forward now that you have that legislation and what some other states have done successfully that might be considerations for all of you as you continue this journey and to answer questions about what some of them have done along the way. As they think about this and specifically around that investment in educators, in those teachers, because we know that they do have that biggest impact on student success. So when we think about that professional learning, I think it's important that we set the stage and to understand why you all talked about that legislation that you did. How did we get here and where are we? When we think about that, if you look at those NAEP scores, National Assessment of Educational Progress, 4th grade reading scores, across the nation, only a third of our 4th graders are reading. When we think about the opportunities for those 4th graders as they go on, is higher ed even accessible to them? For those in the workplace, do you have workers that are ready to come and to step into those roles if they're not reading proficient in the 4th grade? Well, we can avoid that because research and science show us that 95% of students can learn to read. But I don't say that lightly. It's not easy. A number of our students will struggle. They will need additional support and intervention. But if our teachers have the expertise, they can meet every one of those students where they are when they step in the room and get them on that trajectory to success. 95% of our students can learn to read. We also know that for many of our teachers, having that expertise is not their fault. The National Council on Teacher Quality since 2006 has done studies of higher education across the country, not just here in West Virginia. I am not picking on any institution here specifically in West Virginia, but as a whole higher education, those education prep programs only about half of them actually give teachers the science behind how to teach reading. We know that's not the only thing they need. Classroom management, and all those other pieces that go along with that. And reading isn't the only thing that teachers read. But we also know, especially for those elementary educators, if they don't have that deep understanding of how students learn to read, they're not going to be able to teach them as effectively. Teachers are the #1 factor in student success. The curriculum programs, the supplemental programs, the intervention programs are incredible tools that they need. They don't actually teach. Those educators do. They're the ones standing and sitting alongside those students every single day. We know that when they can reach them, they're going to have that biggest impact. We know that if you invest in your teachers, as you have done in this legislation, that you will see success in those student outcomes as well. One of the states that you've all probably heard about quite a bit lately in the last few years is Mississippi. In 2013, they passed their Literacy-Based Promotion Act. That Promotion Act wasn't just a third grade retention goal. Through that legislation, they also ensured that teachers were going to have the expertise that they needed. They knew that they would need coaches and supports for teachers ongoing, long-term. They knew that they needed to involve the families and the communities that their schools are in. They knew that they had to have support for administrators and for staff to be able to keep that focus. Because we don't want success for a year or two. We want success long-term for our students. Year after year, we want that success. Mississippi was able to do that. So they started in 2014 in January, basically training all of their teachers. They had their systems in place. They were hiring their coaches. By 2017, they were one of only 2 states to see an increase in their NAEP scores. In 2019, they were the only state to see an increase in their NAEP scores. Now, in 2022, we know that everyone following the pandemic saw declines in student outcomes. But for the first time ever in 2022, Mississippi was above the national average on their 4th grade NAEP scores. And that was with a 1-point decline. They were still above the national average for the first time ever. When we think about Mississippi and what they've done in West Virginia, I want you to see the trends. And West Virginia is not unlike many other states across the country. You have an advantage. You're already paying attention to it. You're already noticing that something hasn't been working as well as it could be, and what can you all do to help to support them? How can you best support those students? And you're doing that with this legislation. As you can see from this, there's a number of other states that are tackling this challenge, that are saying it's not okay for us to have that few students at proficient levels, and we're going to make a difference in taking that stand. So if we think about how you can do this and be successful, you are doing those right things that focus on the science of reading and recognizing that teachers need that expertise and that training in order to move forward. To be able to reach every student when they come in, no matter what their background, no matter the interactions they've had previously to school and learning, that when teachers are there, they're maximizing every moment and being intentional with every activity and strategy that they use to have that impact. And what we've noticed from states that really do this successfully is that it's a statewide approach, which is also what you guys have in place and are looking toward. So I want to talk about the science of reading for just a minute, because this is an important piece to all of this, is using that science to inform what you're doing. We are not born knowing how to read. I know for some that might be an interesting concept, that it should just, does anybody feel like they just learned how to read? Like they they don't remember a time when they didn't know how to read? Any educators that have had a student that just seemed like they just got it? That's not the case. Our brains are hardwired to learn the language that we hear spoken within minutes. So all that babble, the talk that we use with baby talk, and they begin by the age of usually around 1.5 to 2, they're starting a handful of words, and that continues to progress with language that they hear spoken. That doesn't translate automatically into being able to read print. That might be because we were speaking language, the English language, for thousands and thousands of years before there was ever a written system. And then they attached a written system onto what the sounds were in the language that we had. That can make English seem really difficult, but there's actually sense to it. Now, do we have anybody in here that's a little more familiar with math, a little more comfortable with math than they are reading and literacy? Maybe. This is an actual equation. The end product, the sum that we want to get to, is comprehending readers. But there are two big bucket areas of skills that we really have to ensure students have. Understand deeply, are fluent and accurate and automatic in those skills. One, word recognition. They need to understand and recognize the words, right? So the sounds of the words, they attach the sounds to the printed symbols that they see. They make that connection. Over time, that becomes patterns, and they recognize patterns, though that almost instantly we now recognize words as fluent readers and adults. The other part of that being language comprehension. We have to understand language. We have to understand the meanings of words. We have to have background knowledge about what we're talking about. I'm sure there are things here in West Virginia that are very unique to West Virginia that are not the same, and growing up in Iowa, I may not be as familiar with. So that background knowledge to others means that sometimes as educators, we have to help fill that in and give them that experience. If we have a student who can recognize the words but does not have an understanding of that language, doesn't have access to the background knowledge, they have a 1 times 0, the answer is 0. See? So we have to have students that are fluent, accurate, and automatic in both of those big bucket areas in order to be comprehending readers. But that does make it seem simple, and it's not. And I will apologize, the title on that slide is incorrect. I will send an accurate title for this slide. This is actually Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. It takes the simple view of reading and it breaks it down a little further and helps us understand that all of these individual skill areas that go into those two big bucket areas are actually intertwined, and they're reliant on one another as well. So if you have a student in your classroom who's struggling to read, it could be because they don't have a background knowledge, or they don't understand the syntax or the semantics. It could be they don't understand that sound symbol connection for that word. Or it could be multiple of them all at the same time. So our teachers need to deeply understand this information, the progression of that acquisition of skill that students have to go through in order to have an impact on every student that steps in the classroom, no matter what the curriculum or the interventions or the supplemental programs that they have available to them are. When we think about how this can be implemented and how other states like Mississippi have done that, teachers need to understand the how, the what, and the why. By just providing a curriculum or an intervention program, we'll get a little success if it's research-based, if they implement with fidelity. But until teachers deeply understand the why, you won't have the greatest results. The letter suite, that is what was used in Mississippi, provides the opportunity to reach educators from pre-K through elementary and their administrators, so that it's a system-wide approach to be able to ground all of that professional learning in the science of reading, keep the focus on data, and not just numbers, but actually understanding what that means for each of those students and their futures with that information. And then how that instruction should be changed, adjusted for those individuals or groups of students that need that extra support. Through letters, that's provided through a hybrid blended learning opportunity. Online support and course that's available with text, as well as live facilitated sessions. So teachers are learning independently, they are coming together as a community, and one of the best features of all of this is there's a direct connection back to what they do every day in their classroom, done over time. So this isn't quick little workshops, get them in for a couple of days and then send them on their way. It's continuous learning connected back to transfer what they're learning into their practices and going through that over time so that there's built-in support. Because we know that when that's in place is when you get long-term results for years later, not just for that short time in which they're in that learning session. Professional learning needs to be based in that science of reading. We need to invest in those teachers to be those experts. It needs to be over time, it needs to be providing that information in the best ways that we know it can. It needs to be deep and intensive. But beyond that, it also needs to really help them utilize those tools that they already have so that you're not having to invest in new curriculums and other tools as long as those are evidence and research based. I don't want to take any more time today. First, it was to thank you all for the work you're doing around early literacy for the future of West Virginians, and then answer any questions around what other states have done as you go into the next steps of this journey and having that impact on students.
Are there any questions for our presenter? Yes, Delegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned the success you had in Mississippi. What other states are utilizing the Lexia company, and what other states results?
Sure. So I'll go back. There was a map, and you have it in your materials as well, that kind of shows those other states. There's different ways to look at that data. So first of all, just on professional development is difficult because there's a number of factors that go into that. Are all their administrators on board? What are the curriculums being used? What kind of screeners and data measurements are being used? However, one of the states that I always recommend that folks look at, well, actually there's two. One is Alabama, who fairly quickly followed in Mississippi's footsteps. There was actually a news article that a reporter in Alabama that wrote the headline, "We can't say thank God for Mississippi anymore," because they surpassed Alabama on their NAEP scores. So they followed in their footsteps, and they've done some work pre-K through elementary there. And they have some results out of their pre-K work that they've done focused that have gotten very good results. There was almost a threefold increase in the number of pre-K students who were ready for kindergarten if their teachers had had training. And we can make that available to all of you if you would like that preliminary study. Also in North Carolina, almost 3 years ago, they started the conversation, and 2 years ago enacted legislation changing what they've been doing for about 20 years. They went really bold, and they are requiring every pre-K through 5th grade teacher and administrator to complete science of reading training. They started that in the fall of 21, right at the height of all of the disruption with the pandemic. They use the same screening benchmark assessment for the entire state. They have been reporting back to their State Board of Education that they are seeing gains in North Carolina that are stronger gains in those students using the exact same assessment everywhere else in the country. They have also reported that in their first year, when they were done at that end of year benchmark, they broke their implementation into 3 starting points. Those teachers that had gone through the first half of LITERS training were getting greater results with their students than teachers that had not yet started in their training. And there's a couple of articles that we can also make available to everyone to be able to look at that. But, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Statler.
Yes, my question follows down somewhat the same lines. I think professional development is the answer that we're going to be needing to look for, because the students always get what they need to see from their teachers. My question is, in those states, because you answered some of them before, in those states that you see the greater gains in the K-12 work with higher education within that state to deliver that professional development, and what was the reluctance of the teachers to take that step?
So the answer would be, in those states, the professional development that was used for teachers was LETRS, Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. In each of those states, there have been and are ongoing conversations with their educator prep programs in order to ensure that ongoing and further into the future, their educator prep programs do encompass all of that science of reading as well. If they don't currently, working with them to be able to move toward that, so that over time, all of those teachers coming out of their universities, no matter which ones they are, will all have that. In one state that happened at the very beginning in North Carolina, all of their educator prep programs are shifting their framework and changing it so that by the time all teachers are trained, every new teacher coming out of a North Carolina institution will be trained in the science of reading coming out. In Mississippi, Alabama, and some other states, higher ed has been a slower conversation, but they have had that conversation along the way and are doing that. The professional learning for teachers was not provided by higher ed institutions. And in those places, they made the choice to move forward with letters. I think perhaps because it is based on science of reading, it's been around for a number of years. At this point, it's one of the only professional learning, if not the only one, that has been utilized at that type of scale in order to impact that many teachers.
A little follow-up to that is, this is just my opinion, but in West Virginia, I don't believe we have the strongest evaluation system out there that's going. In the states that are successful, do you see evaluations of the teachers? Because if I'm understanding you correctly, this is an ongoing thing. You just don't overnight say, so it's an ongoing thing. How much does evaluations play into that? Because someone's going to catch on to it faster than others.
Sure. So I think the best way that I've seen it take place and the conversations that I've overheard are to not necessarily focus as much on evaluation as it is on support for the teachers. We know that anytime we're asking anyone in any industry or any profession to shift anything, it takes time and it takes support to be able to do that. And so rather than more from an evaluative or punitive type lens, looking at it more from a supportive, what types of observations and strategies should we see being used in these classrooms? And how can we support our teachers in being able to continue to move forward and keep that focus? It's easy to go back to habits we've had before than it is to learn something new and always stick with it. So coming at it from a support standpoint and helping to encourage, coaches and specialists and administrators, the DOE staff to be able to recognize and continue to keep that focus and think about how can we look at observations in the classroom and what we should see, and if we're not seeing it as strong as it could be, how can we help to support those teachers to get there? Ultimately, in most cases, a lot of that is then we look at that student data. However, we always know that there are sometimes extenuating circumstances as well. We don't want it to be a punitive thing where it's held against them, as long as there is that forward progress. I can say that with letters or any professional learning that's difficult for teachers, right? Any of us, if we were to come to Marshall and take a class again, it's always really difficult at first, and lots of emotions come into play. We have seen, and we continue to see in all of these states, some reluctance, some resistance often at first from some. There are others that are chomping at the bit, ready to volunteer to get going. But once they begin to get into it, that emotion switches to, this is why I became a teacher. I became a teacher because I wanted to have an impact on the students and make a difference for them. And now I recognize and know how I can best do that. And as soon as we get to that point, then we see that they're committed and they really want that. Did I answer that question? Okay. Further questions? Delegate Jennings.
Yes, I have, thank you for coming, thank you. I have two questions. One is our pronunciation. I always said I'm very fluent in Hispanics, but I have a lot of trouble with English. And that runs through, about everybody I know out in rural areas, and that gives them trouble with the reading and everything. How do you work against that? My second question, we let our kids text way they use words there goes against what they need to learn. And I was just wondering how you work on that.
Yeah, well, first I'll say we help to embrace it because all of what you just mentioned is part of who they are. It's part of their culture, right? And we don't want to ever take that away from any students. We do want to help give them access and understanding so that they can be literate as well. So when we are working in classrooms with teachers, we want them to recognize that there's almost it's not exactly a dual language, it's like a trans-languaging that happens. I may have this language or this way in which I speak at home that might sound very different than when I'm with my colleagues even here. If I were on the phone with my sister, I'm gonna sound very, very different perhaps than I do standing up here in front of all of you. And so all of us do this in some ways all day long with whoever we're speaking with and interacting with. It's helping the teachers to recognize and understand that if a student is writing and is writing in the way they speak, that's not wrong, even if we might have wanted them to use some different language. And so then we help model for them. And we help them begin to understand and recognize the distinctions between the two, but not ever wanting them to believe that one of them is bad. And we want to embrace that part of the culture as they come. The texting is different, right? Because you only have so many characters, you're trying to do it quickly. And so it's a way of life for all of us now. And again, it's helping them students to understand the differences. We write a speech, if we're presenting it in one place differently than we're going to text our friend or our mom, that's different than when we're hanging out with our friends. The choice of words and vocabulary and language that we choose are different. So it's helping to recognize the audience, where you are, and what those choices are, and giving them exposure to that, and then helping them to recognize the differences.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How much of a factor, how much is it undiagnosed that dyslexia plays a part of this, and how, say, West Virginia approaches it versus other states, and how often, I worry about how often it's undiagnosed in particular, because kids just struggle, it's attributed to they just can't do the work when really it's a specific problem.
Right. Well, dyslexia is, somewhat prominent. I can't, it's certainly not half of the population by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a percentage of the students that struggle. When we think about that, there are legislative policy things that can be done to ensure that there are screeners in place that can screen, at the end of kindergarten or first grade for dyslexia specifically. And there are certain ones that do that. That is one way to think about that. As you move forward with this early literacy legislation that you already have, through that professional learning that teachers should get, they will have a deeper understanding of what dyslexia is. And they will begin to recognize some of the characteristics of dyslexia and other reading disorders and challenges, and begin to recognize and understand how to help intervene, even if they don't have an official diagnosis. I do recommend that that be something that's considered, right, to help support those students that need even that extra support if they have dyslexia. But through a lot of that professional learning, your educators will get that expertise to be able to recognize those signs and be able to start intervening even earlier to help with that.
Delegate Inman. Hi. Madam Chair, thank you for being here. Thank you for this presentation. I have a question about the professional learning. How long does that take? And you had mentioned that in North Carolina, all the pre-K admin took that training. So I'm curious as to how that was delivered.
Sure. So I'll try to find it again. I might not have exactly the right spot. In North Carolina, so there are those three, under the letter suite, there's three different courses. There is letters for administrators that's intended for administrators, superintendents, assistant supes, principals, assistant principals, those in leadership roles. There is letters for early childhood educators, that's for pre-K. And then letters for educators, which is intended for the elementary grade levels. Letters for administrators is typically implemented over a 2-year period, recommended to be done while their elementary teachers are going through as well. Letters for elementary educators is a 2-year process. There's a couple reasons for that. One, teachers have a lot going on in their classrooms. And to add on another thing can almost seem overwhelming. And so we don't want to overwhelm them. We want it to be done over time to make it accessible to them. We also, by doing it over 2 years, build in that support where they are learning and applying and learning and applying, building a case study and taking it back to their classrooms, doing their own learning as well as coming together as a community in professional facilitated sessions so that they are learning, they're reviewing, they're learning more in that spiral pattern that we know works great for students and it's also great for adult learning. Because that's done over time, we know that we're changing their practices in the classroom. It's shifting and we're keeping that focused. Letters for early childhood is typically done over a school year, although it could be as a semester. That's given the nature of the content. Our littlest learners, it isn't teaching them to read in pre-K. It's priming that circuitry in their brain, priming it to be ready to learn when they step into kindergarten. Those teachers don't have to have the deep understanding of all that science, of all of those skills that are then acquired over that elementary grade span. But we do want them to recognize what's most critical for those students in that pre-K setting before they're stepping into kindergarten. So that's typically done over the course of the year. So in North Carolina, roughly 45,000 teachers and educators in that pre-K-5 space. They had about 15,000 a third started in fall 1. About a third started in winter or January of year 1. The final third started in the year of fall 2. That started in fall of 21. So cohort 1 is finishing in the next month or so. Cohort 2 will finish in December, cohort 3 a year from now. Every educator will be, every elementary and pre-K educator will be trained. So it's done with online and then live facilitated sessions. We have flexibility with that. They can be done virtually, but they are live. They log in face-to-face, questions, small groups, rooms, breakout rooms, all of that interaction. And we can do on-site, so that depends. If we're working with districts or schools or groups that are more rural and spread out, they may want to do virtual because it fits with the scheduling better. Or they might want to do it at times when it's easier to get subs, or they want to do it after school. We also can do it on site when it makes sense to bring those groups together, if that makes most sense. So there's flexibility in how we do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there further questions for our guest? I wanted to mention, since there aren't any further questions, that when researching for the literacy bill, just to kind of talk with teachers from 2 of those states specifically that you mentioned, Mississippi and North Carolina, when we were looking ahead and talking about, well, what professional development did you feel, or did you guys use, or did you feel was the most useful when it came to science of reading? And I want to say letters was always mentioned. If there was another one mentioned at all, it was not often enough that I even remember the names. So this is, in those states and other states also of teachers that I've spoken with, they all highly recommend the letters professional development. And I know we talked about this a little while ago, but I want to mention that I think our teachers are so used to professional development being a one-day thing. We have an 8-hour day, it's scheduled, the kids are off, and we have professional development that day, and it ends that day. We're implementing it, whatever we learned in the classroom. For this to be expanded, I think that's going to be our challenge, is that the mindset change of, okay, it's not something I'm learning in one day, it's something that I am using and continuing to learn over the course of a few years, and even still doing it after that as well. So I think, I know you have a meeting at the department tomorrow, but I think making sure that our counties are holding our teachers and our administrators accountable for this professional development, and then making sure our state department is holding counties accountable, and make sure that every single person in here is kind of checking in with our counties to make sure that we are doing, we are saying, how are you guys staying on top of this? Because it's so important. I think it's just really important that we make sure that we're doing that, just kind of push in a positive way. That other states have seen that this is such so successful, let's make sure we do it too.
Well, and it's making it a system-wide. It's not one entity that's responsible, it's everyone that's responsible. And I forgot to mention that we're also really excited. We are entering and starting a relationship with the Harless Center right here with some of their staff, and we're really excited about that. So there are really great things happening here in West Virginia. We're hopeful that we can be thought partners along the way with all of you, and that you will be a story that we're able to talk about with others, as we are with Mississippi and North Carolina.
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much
Thank you
for
all very
coming. We
much.
appreciate it. Okay, is there any more business to come before the committee today? All right, the co-chair has some business. He would like to make an announcement.
Before we get to the 7th item on adjournment, I'd like to ask each of the House members to hang around for a couple minutes before we have the group photo at 12:30. Okay, just hang, I have just one thing to go over with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. There being no further business before the committee, I'm going to recognize the co-chair.
I do move that we meeting be adjourned.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Okay, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.